I'm going to try that. Now it's recording.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So I must have missed a step there. Yeah. Thank you so much, Margot, because I was hesitating also about, are we recording? Okay. So I'm going to say a little bit about my role, and I made some notes here. So then I want your agreement on this, because it's sort of like us beginning to work together. I will offer some content, and I'll ask you for feedback, especially after this first time, to see if, hey, if it's too much content and not enough experiential and that sort of thing. But I'll be offering some content, some exercises. We'll have time for Q&A. We'll have time for doing the exercises and having feedback to one another. And my role is also to manage the time, to make sure we get everything in and maybe cut certain things short and so forth. But I need your help managing the time. That's not exactly my strongest suit. I sometimes get involved in things and get lost. And I also will have homework ideas, but sometimes I'll need your input. Like, what shall we give the buddies for homework? Here's my suggestion. What do you think? That sort of thing. And of course, it's partly my responsibility to offer a safe container here for us to go deep with each other. And again, I need everybody's help with that, or particularly letting me know if something is coming up where you're feeling unsafe, because I can't always tell. And one of the purposes that I'm seeing for this is, you guys don't know me, and I've been doing what I do for 55 years, and you just might want to know some of the things that I've particularly learned and that I particularly value about coaching and personal growth and that sort of thing, group process. So I'm going to today particularly give you a bit more about my own biases, what I focus on, and how I might be a tiny bit different than the circling and AR tools that you've learned. So maybe I'll get into that right now. It's just my own bias. I think that my biggest commitment is helping people become more self-aware about whatever's going on inside of them, their own motivation, their own blind spots, their own personality patterns, and how that colors what you're able to perceive in the environment. So I am trained as a clinical psychologist, and we learn a lot about unconscious motivation. So you'll be seeing probably a little more about making the unconscious conscious in my work, maybe a little less about connection. I believe that when people show up with more self-awareness and know what they're feeling and know where that's coming from, it naturally leads to deeper connection. But I don't usually put connection foreground. I put the self-knowledge piece foreground. So in a sense, I'm thinking of this mentoring group as an opportunity to sharpen our own instrument, our own self as an instrument of perceiving, communicating, offering quality feedback to other people, and noticing when our own projections might be in the mix, and getting really good, and this is what we're going to be focusing on today, getting really good at spotting when some of our own emotional triggers or our emotional tender spots, let's call them, are coming into play. And that's what I'll be doing an exercise on in a minute. But to show you, just give you some specific examples of kind of how my bias might be different than some of the AR practices. There's the empathy game that you all did. And one of the final prompts in the empathy game is, what I really get about you is. Now, I have problems with the what I really get. I have problems with the really. because for me, the really makes it sound like I'm way more sure of that's you than I really am. I prefer a little more tentativeness, like I might say, what I think I get about you is, or what I'm remembering that you said, and this gives me the impression that you're really da da da, so that we take a little more distance from what a lot of people would call our assessments, our assumptions, our interpretations about the other. We get a little more humble and distant about that. So that just gives you a flavor for my style is always to be kind of cautious about what is often called in your language perceptions, but perceptions are, in my world, is what I actually see, what I actually hear, and inferences is what I make of what I see and hear. So I make a distinction between perceptions and inferences. And I know you've learned a lot about the difference between what you imagine, what you see or hear, and what you imagine. You've all done quite a bit of work in that, have you? Like the difference, but you've done exercises on that one. Give me a little feedback on that. Yeah. So that's a good one. I'm all over that one where we make that distinction. And I think I'm getting into why this is important, to why the whole notion of being aware of your emotional triggers is important, because those are the things that cloud our perception, our need to be liked, our need to be seen as competent. These, you guys mentioned stuff like this in your questionnaire, and thanks a lot for that. These needs are often connected. I mean, who doesn't want to be liked and seen as competent, okay? But to the degree that it is really foreground for you in your teaching and facilitation style, it might cause you to only see something like what I really get about you, and you might only see something that couldn't possibly create any distance or any uncomfortableness between yourself and the other. Versus my value would be, you always care about the other person, and you don't say things carelessly, but you can give difficult feedback and still care. And we'll talk more about how to do that, later on in the classes, because I think it's a super important thing to be able to speak the truth in a way that might jar the other person, but will also, you stay there with the person and you work it out. So I'm not for gratuitous bluntness, but I just think that sometimes our personality patterns, there's a few things that get in the way of us really perceiving fully accurately, and one is triggers, and the other things that I'm going to say are somewhat related to triggers. I call them control patterns, your control patterns, which means your habitual personality style, which has you like look on the bright side or be a little skeptical about things. That's one personality polarity. Or like to talk a lot versus be overwhelmed with too many words. Different personalities have those differences. So again, in future sessions, I'll be looking more at control patterns and personality style blind spots. But today I want to look mostly at triggers. So I'm warming up to that. But I'm looking at the list of AR exercises that Margot sent me. And there's another piece I just want to address because it shows some of my biases. One of them is being with you, I notice. And again, when I've worked with people who are trained similarly to the way I think you guys have been trained, the word notice often covers things that are kind of general, like I notice some uncomfortableness here. Okay, you could say that. I notice an aura of uncomfortableness. Well, that for me is not exactly a noticing. That's more of one level up from what you notice. It's a bit of an interpretation. It's good to be able to do that, but I would not use the word notice for that. So I would use the word notice for things like I noticed John's finger tapping as he's listening, that sort of thing. Or I noticed Eric looking at the floor, that type of thing. Things you actually see. Or I noticed the birds singing outside. So that's my language, and I'm like super careful about stuff like that. And maybe some people will find that a little bit inhibiting. And then one more little thing that shows my sort of bias or my angle on things. In the complain game, there's a place where you ask your partner, what are you committed to doing about this situation in your real life? Well, I'm all over doing things, but I don't emphasize doing usually. I emphasize what are you feeling and sensing and wanting. Always start with where you are before you think about doing. So again, I'll be coming back to that, but I'm giving you little tidbits of things that I had a little caution or red flag about when I read through the AR exercises. And why don't I just give you one more here, and then I'll feel complete, and then you can ask me questions if you want. The last one was, where you take 5 minutes and you take the stage and you just say what's present for me. Now I'm aware of my feet on the ground. Now I'm aware of the color of John's shirt. You do your current flow of awareness. It says here you're supposed to do that with no pause. Now I do that exercise a lot in my groups, and maybe there's some advantages to no pause, I suppose, because you don't inhibit yourself. So I can see that. But I find that sometimes people need a bit of a pause to connect with themselves. Because especially if you say, and I see the frown on John's face, you might need a minute, or not a minute, but a couple of seconds to go, and now I notice my heart beating fast or tension in my gut after saying that type of thing. It just sometimes people need to pause. So I'm a very big believer in pauses and all that other stuff I just said. So any comments about that? I'm gonna stop there. It's a little bit lectury, but I needed to give you a bit about my framework. If there's no comments, we'll go into an exercise where everybody gets a turn. So the exercise that I want to do has to do with emotional triggers. But first, I want to give a tiny little background here, because today we're not going to be talking about trauma. We can talk about that another time. But today, I'm really talking about things that happened in your childhood. I mean, that probably have roots, at least roots in your childhood, that were simply your core needs not being met, your core attachment needs, your needs for loving attention, your needs for guidance, your needs to not be overly controlled, your needs to be respected, your needs to be listened to and attended to. So really, we'll call those attachment needs. And those, anything that's, the theory is, if there are certain attachment needs that didn't get met very well, that creates unfinished business for our entire life. It's sort of like karma that we're working out. And I actually think that this movement, the AR and circling movement, helps us heal those attachment wounds, because, you know, it gives us, we give each other loving attention, and that's huge. And we learn to give ourselves loving attention. So I'm really happy that this movement is spreading as a world healing movement. But I think I want to bring us to the awareness that every single one of us, no matter what country, no matter rich or poor, we all started out little in a world dominated by big people. And we depended on those big people for our survival in the beginning. And very often when we're little, we cry out to have our needs met in some way. We fuss, we scream. A lot of babies just suck their thumb and don't do anything. But usually there's some period in an infant's life when you are in distress and you're needing something from the parent, and either the parent is distracted or doesn't know what to do, or just somehow even takes it personally, like, I'm not a good mom, I don't know what to do. So very often we get an experience before we even have words where if we're in pain, and it's usually some kind of emotional pain because it's a survival fear. It's like, if I don't get picked up and fed right now, I might die, that type of thing. Or just generally not knowing how to navigate the world and needing that safe holding of a nurturing parent. And the parents are distracted. Parents, got a lot of other things to do. Or parents are uncomfortable themselves with raw emotion. And so very often we get the impression that if we're in emotional pain, it makes the adults around us uncomfortable. And so a lot of times that translates to, if I'm in pain, there's something bad or wrong about me. And so this, I think, is why almost all of us need healing around our ability to be relaxed about our own emotional pain. And what are triggers? So I'm leading into the triggers exercise here. Triggers are some kind of emotional pain is coming up for us. It's usually a fear that some need isn't going to be met, like the need for connection or the need for approval or something, simple things. So when I talk about triggers, I'm talking about that level today. And if you've had serious physical violation type of trauma, let me know this in an email or something, and let me know the extent at which you've worked with it, because I do want to deal with violation type traumas. But this is the stuff we're talking about today is something that almost every child has experienced. So with that introduction, I'd like us to go around, and I think the way Zoom works is who's on my screen, the order of people on my screen isn't the same as who's on your screen. So I think I will just call on people. I'll ask for one person to volunteer to start us, and then I'll just call on people to make sure everybody gets their turn. So the question I wanted to ask you is either one of two questions. Something that has, like an actual event that has triggered me, either in a group or a primary relationship, but don't give a whole lot of context for it, just something that you can name the context, but we want to be kind of efficient in this. Something that has triggered me, like what another person said that triggered me, and how I knew I was triggered. So what happened that triggered me, and how I knew I was triggered. You know, like my throat got tight or something like that would be an example. And if you don't have an answer for that question, so these are one or two alternatives here. The other one is simply, what do you know about your own triggers in general? And what triggers you and what happens when you get triggered. So you don't, if you can't think of a specific on the spot here, make your response more general. Okay, is that clear, that little sharing question? Who wants to start? So take a minute and reflect. Is there a situation that I can remember where I went into that reaction of either wanting to talk a lot, being upset, being angry, being judgmental? These are all some of the early warning signs that people are triggered. Fight, flight, freeze, basically. Okay.
I can start.
Brianna, you can start. Thank you.
Thank you. So initially, I was I was doubting which one to pick, and I ended up getting very clear about one moment that may have happened quite earlier, but the episode, it's not that recent, might have been 10 years ago or something, but it's a pattern. And very quickly, or summarizing, it is the moment when my dad stopped talking to me. So basically gave me, I think it's called the silence treatment. And the way I know I was triggered was because I had fear of being in the same room of his. I would feel something that I can identify these days as a melting sensation around my chest. I was melting, almost like disappearing, but in a melting way. Cold and wet. Inability to cry, yet crying inside. And fearful of eye contact, fearful of moving. And just a desire for the time to go very quickly. Feeling very lonely and very guilty, like not worth it of anything. Yeah.
So let's pause there. That's very clear. And by you telling some of these things that were going on inside of you, this helps us all as we listen to Adriana. We can say, these are some of the things that go on inside of people. You gave us very articulate. Was there anything that I cut you off? Because I did ask to pause there. Was there something more you were about to add?
I think what was coming to me is that I think that event and those events, there were more than once, may have really shaped how I feel today, how I want a continuous, why I want a continuous assurance that I'm not cut off.
Good.
And how I deal difficultly with silence or even lack of expression, because the silence was accompanied by no facial expression. With my eyebrows, and he has even thicker eyebrows, a lack of expression is still very intense.
So I like what you added on there, Adriana, that this affects you to this day. And so I wanted to ask you one more question, and then we're going to keep the rounds going just in the interest of time. How would, and this is for group facilitators now, how do you imagine other people would be able to see that you were triggered? What might they be able to pick up from what you just shared? Because, we're scanning as facilitators, is everybody present, or are some people, back at 2 years old right now, So is there any way we might know?
So in this particular case, I think in a room, one would notice, because I would myself become very silent. So I would change my behavior, which I was definitely not very silent as a child. So I think there was a dramatic change of my behavior. But also I would go with lack of expression. And so I think I was mirroring. So I think people would notice me with no facial expression, which is a change.
Yeah. Thanks. That's very helpful, I think. Let us go to Eric. Are you ready, Eric?
I was wondering, because Adriana shared a very early expression, and I was thinking of a recent.
I was thinking of more recent ones myself, but anything is good because it causes you to reflect. So yeah, either way.
I was pretty triggered by an incident in a men's group where I'm in. We had a gathering, and I took care of dinner, and others took care of snacks and stuff. And it was for 10 people. And then I got a bill presented for these snacks, which was way out of proportion. So first of all, I didn't expect a bill because I took care of dinner for 8 people. And second of all, it was way out of proportion. And there was so much left. There was such an abundance of food. It was out of this world. So I got triggered by that. And how I noticed that is I was judgmental on the person that bought the food. I was out of contact and not curious anymore. Why this happened, and I could just notice there was an emotion in me that I wasn't taken seriously, or I wasn't seen. So that was one of the judgmentals, the judgment on him, that he didn't see that I took care of dinner. And I judged him on being irresponsible. And there was no contact anymore between us. We both closed. He was angry and I was closed.
That's very clear. Thanks. Now my next question would be, how would, if that was in the whole group context, how would either a facilitator or other group members know you were triggered? If they were really perceptive.
Well, they don't have to be that perceptive.
Well, you weren't saying your judgments out loud. If you were, that might be a clue.
If I would be in the group, I would have said them out loud. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I would be.
It was.
I would have been judgmental.
Yeah. You would have shared it if it was in the context of a group. So I think that's good to because you weren't. You were just in a different context. So
I get out of contact. That's basically it.
Right, but that's helpful. So what we're wanting to do here is kind of compile and review what are some of the things that indicate that a person has just lost contact with the present moment and is triggered and is, let's say, less resourceful. And one would be they start spouting judgmental thoughts, or I'm going to call them reactive stories. You said I felt I was not being heard. I'll be calling those reactive stories. It's what your mind, the story your mind plays, and those reactive stories usually have a real emotional tone to them, by the way. And there's usually right under that, you can tell what the emotional need is, which is obviously to be heard and to be respected. Yeah. Anything else you want to add there,
Well,
Eric? How would people
what I
know
found.
if we were in a group, let's say, and saw that?
Sorry?
If we were in a group and saw you having that reaction, anything else we might be able to pick up?
I get stubborn.
And how does that manifest in you?
I hold on to my truth.
Okay, so you might be, like you said, you lose your curiosity and need to be right, that sort of thing. Yeah, I think we could probably pick that up. Good. That's probably enough for now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. How about Pauline? You ready?
Yes, I'm ready. I was thinking of a recent situation with a colleague at work, or actually somebody on my team that I'm her boss. That doesn't really matter, but it was a situation where we were traveling together, and she hadn't received a clear itinerary, and she's someone who gets stressed very easily when she doesn't know what's happening. And I'm the opposite. I'm like, I just arrive at the train station 2 minutes before the train's due to leave, and I was super chill, and I arrive there, and she barks at me and blaming me for not giving her all the information that she needed. And I got super angry. I snapped back at her something about, you're 38 years old. You don't need to be like, you don't need a babysitter, something like that. Like really unkind. Yeah. And
all right. Thank you. That's a good one. And so how did you know you were triggered? It's getting kind of obvious, that one's real clear.
Yeah. Posture, like really, like completely, like my body just, and then this snapping at her and feeling like really angry in my belly and out of proportion angry, like, yeah.
All right. Thank you for that one. I imagine that was a little vulnerable to share, and I appreciate you.
Yeah. I can only share it now because we talked about it again just a week ago, and I know exactly where the trigger is coming from, so I can be kind with myself with that, but it's like, well, yeah.
And in future sessions we'll look more into how to work with the triggers and so forth, but you're talking about where it's coming from, and you're already kind of feeling and thinking into that. And this is probably, the answer is obvious here, but Pauline, how would we know that you were triggered?
I think mostly in my body language. I would shuffle in my seat, or maybe even be at the edge of my seat, or like be just very agitated in my body language if I weren't speaking. And speaking would be barking, probably. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's go to Margot.
I'm going to do a mixture of old and new, just for context. So going right back to the beginning, where this comes from, was that my mum had to go back to full-time work when I was 3 weeks old. And during the day, I was looked after my grandma, who was amazing. So I have a background context, that my situation was almost perfect. So it was so good, and I was so easily distracted that I made it okay, that it was all okay. So I didn't almost couldn't access my pain very well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm working with often. And
I want to say something. I'm just going to jump in here, even though it's I don't know. I just felt to say it. A lot of times when things like this happen very young, we very early get the idea that there's nobody we can depend on. I want you to try this on, so that we actually stop being disappointed with what life gives us. We learn to sort of take everything in stride better than a lot of people who had higher expectations from the world for a little longer. Does this resonate for you at all?
Historically, yeah, it's shifting. That is shifting now.
Yeah.
So that was certainly my 20s and 30s.
Yeah. Go ahead and tell us what.
Yeah. So I'm picking something because it's actually really, I'm trying to pick the thing that's really real, but it's actually very hard to think of an example. Because what's happening is I go with a situation that's almost perfect, but isn't quite right for me. And so a situation will come along and I'll seem like it's really good, everything's fine. And then something will kick in. And so I create a very confusing situation because it seems like everything's fine and suddenly it's like, oh, I don't want this. So yeah, so that's my current.
That's interesting. That's more of I would call that more of a pattern.
Yeah, but my trigger, it seems like I'm suddenly triggered to other people as well. So the trigger is there.
The trigger might be when you're like realizing something. I mean, I'm trying to be helpful here. I'm not sure I am being helpful, but when you feel that dissatisfaction part of yourself, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And this.
So it's so people might notice in that. I suddenly become quite directional. Like I get it's like a masculine energy of clarity. It's like this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
So something kind of masculine comes online. I'm brusque, we would say. Like it's like I'm reading myself. So I'm like reading myself as like a book. Like this is whereas so the energy will suddenly quite shift and it'll seem like I'm very in control still. In fact, it'll seem like I'm more in control of the situation. Whereas actually what's happening is I'm unraveling.
Yes, and actually there may often be nothing specific that the other person did in that moment, but it's where you are in your, let's say, processing of this pattern of going from, hey, this is satisfying to this is not satisfying. There's like a, probably
and in a group situation
it goes like that.
I'm very hard to read in that way because I'll seem even more in control. So my trigger is actually being missed, but then energetically a facilitator who's very energetic will go, there's something really wrong here.
Yeah.
And I'm taking a while because I'm triggered to kind of be able to go, oh, this is my pattern.
Yeah.
So there's in a group, there might be a few minutes of free fall that I kind of create.
Yeah.
Of like people going, did I say something wrong? Like why is this happening?
And people could get uncomfortable with your voice tone or something, but not know why.
Yeah.
And that could include the facilitator starting. And one of the things that I want to be guiding us in is how to use our own discomfort, resistances that come up as a facilitative action. I think you guys are somewhat familiar with this, but I want to be able to practice this with you more. Like, there's something that I'm uncomfortable about right now, and I think it might be the tone of voice, or maybe I just have the thought that I can't read you right now, Margot. And that scares me. You know, I mean, I'm a facilitator modeling that right now, stuff like that. Thank you, because that's a complex one. Yeah, there's people don't always deliver us their triggers on a silver platter here. Okay, let's go to Alex.
I actually found it hard, one, to bring one forward, and two, to choose. I mean, there's so many, I couldn't quite think of an example, but there's an example that stands out because it sounds so ridiculous to say it. So it was about a year ago. My best friend who I live with, we were going out for dinner, and there's a dress I have that she always borrows. This is how ridiculous it is. There's a dress that I have that she always borrows, and I was thinking I might wear it. And she said, "Are you wearing that dress?" And I said, "I haven't decided what I'm wearing yet. I might do." And she came in. She went, "Oh, can I just try it on?" And so I said, "Yeah, sure." So she tried it on, and she kept it on. So if I decided I wanted to wear it, I had to ask for her to remove it. And there was something about me expressing my needs and asking for what I want and taking something away from her that just triggered me really badly. Yeah, really badly. And I basically felt I felt small. I felt like angry, like, well, not, was it, yeah, kind of frustration. There was this like wanting to act and not being able to. It was like someone was squashing everything inside me because I wanted so much to ask for that thing back and I couldn't. And
I love your gestures right now. You know,
yeah, it's still there.
Again, of course, very important to watch for the gestures. And as I see Alex, I'm thinking of, I'm 2 years old and somebody's telling me I can't have something.
yeah. It was a very, very young part of me for sure, and it was very obvious on the outside. I was triggered. I went into a spiral. I couldn't. I ended up just going really silent, and I was doing that. Hi, are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. You know, like, I couldn't express myself. I couldn't explain what was happening in me. I wasn't sure why. I just spiraled down into such a hole that I couldn't articulate, and I ended up saying, "Go out without me." I couldn't really pull myself out, and I was watching it all. What was interesting is I was seeing it all happen, and I still couldn't pull myself out of it.
No, that's a lovely example. And just, I'm going to ask you now, how might people have known you were triggered if you were in a group setting?
It would be very obvious that I'd gone internalized. And if people tried to talk to me, I wouldn't be able to articulate anything other than, "I'm okay, I don't want to talk about this right now." You know, there was I kind of caved in on myself, and I think it would have been quite obvious energetically, physically, and verbally.
Yeah, that's good. Your share brings up something that I want to just insert here, which is you're in a group and someone's behavior looks like what Alex talked about, and you inquire a little bit and you say, maybe I'm wondering how that landed for you, Alex, or something like that. And Alex goes, "I'm fine," because you said those words, "I'm fine." And there's a certain flatness to that "I'm fine," or a certain energy. Alex also said there that she might not have wanted any further attention at that point. So sometimes you inquire, somebody's triggered pretty much because you've got the very hard "I'm fine" out of them, and then they've gone inward. But sometimes they have to say, are you open to being with me around this for a little longer, Alex? Or would you rather just sit silently for a while? That's an intervention that I'd want us to be able to have some of the time. And we'll talk a lot more about different interventions, but that one just popped in right now. Thank you for that. Now, Cassia, you have the name Mila today. What's your actual name?
My name is Kasia Emilia, and that's like the short for Emilia. And I need to change that. Yeah.
So how do you want me to call you? Because other people
Kasia.
probably know you. Kasia. Okay, so it's Kasia. Okay, your turn.
Okay, so I had a situation at the gathering in Portugal where I was coordinating healers, a group of healers. And one of them came to me on the second day, and she said that she's requested to pay for accommodation and food, and I told her that she is not supposed to pay. So there was misunderstanding in our communication, and it totally super triggered me. And what happens to me is that I like go out of my body and I become super defensive too. Like I'm trying to justify.
So you might start explaining yourself or arguing or something like that.
Yes, even before, like even if it's not necessary, I would go into making it right. Mm-hmm.
How many other people here have done that sometimes? Show of hands. That's easy for me to relate to anyway. Okay, explaining and that sort of thing. How might somebody else recognize, Kasia, that you're going through this?
I would like try hard to be calm, to appear to be calm, but everything inside of me would be really shaky. And then when I would be asked, I would probably be talking a lot and in a very like defensive way.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's pretty clear here. Mercury, you ready to share?
Yeah. My example is I was at a retreat and they wanted us to stay inside for some duration, and I really wanted to be outdoors, to be just outside the front door, so to integrate with nature a bit, get some air. And so I went out there and literally was just outside the front door sitting there. And one of the crew came out and asked if I had asked permission to be outdoors. And I was like, oh, I'm triggered. So the trigger there is the sort of exertion of control over me, telling me what I can and can't do. The trigger particularly comes when there's a lack of thoughtfulness around it. So when I sense a deep personal care toward me, like, oh, I feel that what you're doing, when it's personalized, I feel like that's thoughtful, then it doesn't arise. When it's sort of just like a blanket application of a rule without what feels like a thoughtfulness or specifically thinking about me and my circumstance, then I feel, then there's a trigger there. So things that I feel in my body or things that indicate it are, I go from being maybe assertive to more aggressive in my how I address the person. I tend to speak quickly. There's a lack of patience. There's a lack of compassion. I will throw out sort of valid but extreme points.
That's good enough.
Okay.
And how would we know if we're watching this that you were triggered, Mercury?
Well, I actually I have a practice now, and I did it in that moment where I will actually state that in some way. So I said to him, "Wow, that's triggering." So I try to really just own it right up front, and it's kind of like a nice because then it's like a carte blanche. I can do whatever I want after that. I've said I'm triggered, and therefore everything that follows is I can retract later. Go
Like,
out and take.
don't pay attention to anything I say for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah,
'Cause it won't
yeah.
be
I no longer owning this experience.
from my deepest place. Mhm.
Yeah. So first thing is I try to actually have the awareness to say, yeah, I'm triggered. As I mentioned some of them, the rather than being sort of calm and saying and kind of being of a disposition where it's like I'm listening to the other person and trying to understand their perspective and just being calm and not feeling a need to react or do anything. I feel like I need to take action. So there's a sense of a bit of aggressiveness, a brashness to my speech because I feel like I need to sort of take a position. Or rather that I need to assert very strongly my position, rather than saying actually what you think I'm interested in. I'm curious. I'm taking a step forward into it.
Good. I like that you have that practice of saying, "I'm triggered." What I like to encourage people to do once they say that, and we were joking a little bit there, Mercury, about discount everything I'm going to say now. But what I like to encourage people to do is use that as your signal to pause and really feel yourself and bring some loving attention to yourself. We're going to do some work on that later in this course, but just once you know you're triggered, you can get yourself present by using certain practices that some of you already have learned. But the first thing is getting a little more relaxed and accepting about the fact that we do get triggered. And I like the responses I've been getting here today because I get the feeling that you guys are pretty much where I am, at least in theory, of accepting that most everybody has triggers and they're going to happen sometimes, and it's not a cause for big shame or self-blame or anything. So my philosophy is these are a doorway into what needs healing, deeper attention in the self. And I teach a process called compassionate self-inquiry, which I want to teach you guys probably next time. Let's go with Ina, last one here. Oh, where'd she go?
I think we lost her. She was on the train.
Yeah, she's just dropped off.
I should have had her first. Darn it. I forgot that. Well, okay, here we are. And maybe she'll find a place where she can get internet and come back on. And then we'll invite her back. But we've just seen a bunch of different examples, and I think you all were very articulate in showing how the body reacts and how some of us get more talkative, more active, more aggressive when we're triggered, and others of us kind of shut down. And I want to keep paying attention to that polarity and just discover together if I'm a person who gets pretty aggressive when I get triggered, would I, and this is a working question here, I don't have an answer to it, would I be apt to not recognize people who go inward and not recognize that they are in a troubled state? Or if I'm the kind of person who freezes and somebody gets real aggressive in one of my groups, would I freeze up because it's not a language that I speak comfortably, the language of assertion and aggression. So those are just things I want us to watch for. I don't like to make big generalizations, but just always watch for how the way I'm wired up makes it easier or more difficult for me to tune in to people who are somewhat different type or wired up somewhat differently than me. Because I'm all about everybody gets to be their own unique self. All right, so let me see. I had a few more things I wanted to do with us today. Maybe a little bit of feedback. Just a few of us, and this would just be popcorn style, where you say something to somebody who spoke about their trigger today in this form. Like when I said to Alex, Alex, when you did this, I felt very warm toward you. That would be something. So when somebody said or did something, what you felt or what you thought. Thoughts are okay if you name them as thoughts rather than name them as the final word about the other person. It's like, I thought. Sometimes I call that your self-talk or your mind chatter or the story that occurred to me. You can use different language, but just something that helps us know that you are not labeling this person, but more revealing your own thoughts about the behavior. So who wants to try the feedback to somebody? Okay, good.
Can I actually interrupt? Ina's back, and I'd really love to.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thanks for helping me see that. Ina, it's your turn to talk about your trigger. I'm glad we were hoping you'd get back here. I get now that you're on the train. So your trigger and what happens when you're triggered, how you know you're triggered.
You're on mute.
Put my audio. I will stand in the middle, then I have more little privacy.
Okay. Sure.
But when I'm triggered, it's more to that lately I was really triggered about being together with somebody that was really quiet, and I had to really put my ears really, really, really loud to hear her. And at the same time, it also connects to an experience that when I'm talking.
We can ignore that.
So yeah. So no, and then when I'm talking to somebody and I'm sharing something, that when I get a response back like, but you're doing that and that, instead of a question, I get really triggered. I'm like really like, sorry, but I'm really so direct that no, I don't answer this question. Like this is not like this is just a fact you put on, and especially when it's not right, I'm like fully on. Then to realize like to say what I need, but then the harm is already done because I was so into like, ooh, I don't like it, and like, oh no, like.
Well, that's helpful. I just want to. Well, she looks like her screen froze. But when you're triggered, you're usually not that resourceful to say what you want. And so the practices that I'll be sharing with you have to do with giving yourself permission to be kind of offline or out of your right mind for a while and then come back and clean it up. But sometimes once you get used to being triggered in a certain way, you can catch it fast and you can be more resourceful, like you were saying, Ina. You can just go ahead and say what you want. And that's always good if you can bring yourself present that quickly. But I don't like people to put that should on themselves.
Yeah.
And how would we know you're triggered?
Yeah, but yes, and especially when I'm really triggered when I don't notice me as I'm me. And that just goes back to being in a bathtub alone as a 3-year-old, my mom vacuuming on the ground floor and me screaming because I was burning myself and not being heard.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
Only after three screams. And that was, I will stand in a corner here while people are walking beside me. But that is just like, I want to be heard. And I learned that I have to scream to be heard. So also when I...
Gosh, I want to hear the end of that. That sounded like it was going somewhere.
I'm triggered.
Just got cut off. Start all over again. So that goes back. You started to say a little more there, and you got frozen.
Okay. I'm just really like, my pattern is to really fight for my place, to fight for my voice. So whenever I get something put on me that's not the right thing to say, but I have the feeling that somebody puts effect on me, I'm really fighting against it. So I'm really like, I also want to move like forwards. It's like, oh no, it's not true, and this is not me. And yeah, really, really active physically. I want to fight for my rights. So yeah, kind of defensive and short and really rude sometimes. And I don't want to be that, but it's something I have to realize, that I can be really short and rude in that moment.
Yeah, and you know, if I do an interpretation on that, it's like, I want to be seen.
Yes.
Something in that, of the emotion, I want to be seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. The answer to this next question is sort of obvious, Ina, but I'll let you answer it. How would we know that you're triggered?
Facial wise, like I harshen fully in my face, like and I will defend or explain why, or when people say a fact and I feel triggered, I was like, yeah, but give me a question. I was like, I will reach out, but not in a controlling way. In a more controlling way than a connecting way.
Yeah.
Yeah, in a more controlling way than a connecting way.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. We've only left an hour and 15 minutes for this call. I'd like to go about 10 minutes more, but how are you guys with going 10 minutes more? Is there anybody who cannot do that? Okay, nobody said you cannot. So I still do want to have a little bit of time for people's feedback to one another, and then I want to do a checkout round. So that's what we're looking at. Feedback meaning when I saw or when I heard something specific, I felt or I thought. So let's offer some rounds to some of us at least. Not everyone will get feedback.
Can I? Oh, go on, Alex.
No, you go.
When Mercury said the word thoughtless, that shimmered for me. We said if someone says it in quite a thoughtless way.
So say it to him. Let's get used to imagining we're an actual group here. So you pretend like you're sitting across the circle from Mercury and go ahead and start again.
You use the word thoughtless when describing the way someone might come towards you and say something. And there was something happened in me when you said the word that I recognized it. Like if something's done in a thoughtless way, it just is upsetting for me somehow. So I just went with that as I was listening to you. I'm not saying that's what happens to you exactly, but there was something in what you said that was enabled me to access that.
Okay, good, Margot. I thought that was clear. I thought it was clear at one sentence, and yet I understand people's need to not be misunderstood and all of that. And so just notice that, you guys, how often we add one or two more sentences just to make sure our thought gets across or our message gets across well. And it's all okay, but I'm all for shining a little light on and a little magnifying glass here. Thanks, Margot.
That's helpful.
Eric, has feedback for somebody?
When Alex said he was...
So say Alex then.
Alex, when you said you were stuck and you wanted to say something and you couldn't, that really brought some tension to my chest. And I could feel the frustration of such a situation. I recognize it.
And so the receiver of the feedback will just say thank you as a gesture of taking it in.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And Alex, you had some feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Paulina, when you explained how you sort of snapped a little bit at your colleague, I deeply recognized that as something I do and have done, and it actually brought up in me guilt and shame that usually follows when I do snap like that at people. It was quite interesting that I had that after feeling without actually being in the trigger myself. It was felt very familiar to me. So thank you for sharing.
It's nice to know that kind of thing is going on in our groups. So again, from a facilitator perspective, you know, somebody will say something, and Margot too, as well as Alex, notice that, oh, that reminds me of something that happens inside of me. And I think we want to encourage that and encourage people to share about that. Anybody else got feedback? We'll just do like one more. Yes.
I'll just go next. Kasia, when you shared about your trigger, I felt myself opening up to you because it felt so vulnerable to share that. And I could really, because I think I have experienced you also in a similar moment, and I just felt so much love for, you know, you recognizing that and being able to share about it so clearly. And I really appreciated that. Thank you.
Okay, now I'm aware that I'm cutting off the feedback before everybody gets a chance to give and receive. I want to pause and ask people, are there any feelings coming up in anybody about not getting a chance to give or to receive? Let's just open up the space to acknowledge those and speak them, like maybe raise your hand and then I'll call on you, if any. Okay, I'm going to assume it didn't trigger anything there.
So, I was raising my hand, but
oh my gosh. That could be really triggering. I didn't even see that. You wanted to be seen. Well,
I don't know what it is, but it's like my belly was really, really tense the moment you asked like if somebody's triggered, and now I'm also rubbing my belly, but yeah, it was really, really tense just the moment you asked for it. So
thank you. I like just getting everything out into the space that's there. I think we can all learn from each other. Anyone else? And is it Ina or Ina?
It's Ina, and a lot of people have difficulties with pronounce the because it's in So sometimes they call me In, and that's also really fine by me. So if that is more easy, In is fine.
Okay, I needed to know. Everybody else seemed to know, but I was unclear. So I want to make another rounds where we very briefly say something today that you learned or became aware of or relearned, just a one sentence thing. And if you don't, if you also have something you feel unfinished about, add another sentence, like I feel unfinished about da da da, you know, about my need to blah blah blah, say more about, or I want to hear more about. So it's something you learned, relearned, became aware of, and then if there's anything unfinished, you name that, because that'll help me planning for future sessions. So Eric, can you go first?
Yeah.
Just learn, became aware of, that kind of thing.
I'm aware of this, what happens in me. It gets more clear when I reflected on that situation, and what happens in me and how I react and how I respond. And it makes it easier to embrace that part.
Good, that's helpful. Adriana?
Yes, so one thing that I'm aware is that I feel really relaxed and there's a vitality in my body when you spoke about, when you gave this hint about asking someone if they could stay with us. You said, would you like to stay with me in this moment around this subject, or would you like to be in silence for a moment? And I felt really relaxed. I love that approach, and I made me confirm what I've done in the past. It just has a beautiful feeling. I also feel incomplete about something that I would just like to say that I was not aware about this group until a couple of hours ago. So I didn't have much time to work, to prepare, and I feel so right in this place. It seems like came from my guardians, and I feel incomplete because I don't know what's happening next. I know nothing. So I just would like to voice that into the group, that I feel a bit like, oh, what's happening to me next?
You can you can find a little more about that in the buddy thing, about what you missed in terms of correspondence from me, but it wasn't very much. And I will also email you what I sent to the group about a month ago. Okay.
Brilliant, thank you. I've received a lot already. I'm very thankful. Yeah. Thank you, Margot.
Pauline.
Yes, I had a confirmation right at the beginning when you shared about how you express things differently than we might have learned in AR. I feel sometimes that the language of AR can be a bit blurry and misleading in terms of what is a thought, what is a feeling, and I really appreciated that. Like, it was a confirmation for me that, yeah, it's sometimes confusing. And I love this. I love this call, and I feel really good about this group, and yeah, I'm so happy to be here. That's all for now.
Ina?
Okay, I find my sound. I resonate really, really a lot with Pauline. Thank you. Like, I have already got a lesson to be seen by me just today. Like, being on the move, now being in the station, and still just taking the cell phone, calling with you, and even sharing a really vulnerable story when two other people were standing next to me to step out of the train. So it's like, wow, it's unexpected, and it brings up sadness at the same time, because it's now like, oh, I realize this for the first time. I can see myself. So I also feel a little sadness with it, like, okay, it took me a long time to realize this.
Thank you. Mercury?
There was a moment in the beginning where you were laying out some definitions of terms, one of which was distinguishing between perception and inference, I think was the expression used. And that struck me as because perception is an often used word, and I feel like how I use it and how other people receive it is quite well established, so that you shifted that had me wondering about that. Maybe the word is inference, which is far less often used in circles that I move in. And so being mindful, or more mindful, of the distinction between perception and inference is something that I will take away. Particularly so for me personally, because often when I'm in spaces where people say, oh, list some of the things you're most grateful for in life. And one of the things I say is, oh, I'm really grateful for my perception of things. And now I wonder whether I'm really saying is for how I infer things.
I wouldn't read that one that way, but here's the way I would read that. But this is my inference, listening to what you just said, would be, I'm really grateful for my angle on the world. Is that what you mean? Like how I see and where I come from when I see and perceive? Is that what you're grateful for? Because I really am curious now. I want to hear it.
Me too. I'm not so sure, and I feel like I'll be contemplating this.
Okay.
Which is what I wanted to bring it up at the end. Is what I've learned is that some of the words that I think I well know can mean different things. So I will contemplate whether my angle on the world, rather than my perception, is one of the things that I hold most dear.
And when I hear you say, Mercury, that you're going to give this some more thought, I feel deep appreciation for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cassia, your turn.
So I am with what Adriana said about like giving space to someone if they don't feel like being there with what happened. And I just feel a lot of gratitude to see all of you here. Like, it really touches me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alex?
I can't remember the different sentence stems, but I think it's
but just basically you know, take it and use it however you want it, because people have gone a little away from exactly what I said, and I like the way it's going. So, you know, kind of like, what's up for you? What did you learn? What were you aware of? What stood out? Any of that. Plus, what did you feel unfinished about?
Okay, cool. Thank you. So, I mean, what I actually really loved, what I learned, was the way that you didn't get around everybody in the sort of popcorn feedback bit, knowing that some people might be triggered, and actually giving people an opportunity to feel triggered, and being okay with that. There was something in the knowing that we all have triggers, knowing that your decision might have triggered some people, and giving people an opportunity to own that. There was something very relaxing about that, and I really appreciated that approach. So thank you, and thank you, Margot, for organizing this. But yeah, I don't feel unfinished. Thank you.
Okay, and Margot, your turn.
Well, I was going to say the same thing as Alex. I really liked that moment. and it's something I can forget to do. So that was just a rich reminder. And I think generally, I think it's just good for me to remember, like now looking at you all, like just to go with my desire, because I really wanted this. I really wanted to have your voice in our group, and each person that's here, I really value, and I want to be in good relationship with, but also I want to be in this authentic relating world with. So it just, yeah, I think just to remind myself, like to listen to my desire and go for it. And I'm very glad you said yes, Susan. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm very happy that I got invited to do this. So yeah, this has been rich for me too. I'm happy about today. And what I'd like to suggest for perhaps a half an hour of buddy homework would be just simply debriefing this session a little bit more in whatever way works for you. Like each person gets a chance to just say, well, here's a little more that I didn't get to say on the call that was coming up for me. So that's what I mean by debriefing. And I would appreciate you also talking a bit, just so you have an audience to say it, anything that you'd like more of or less of. I haven't really given you much of a menu of things that I could do with you, but anything at all that you think of that you would want more or less of, would you each speak that to each other, and then each person, if anything comes of that that's useful, shoot me an email, please, because I'm still kind of feeling my way through what I'm doing with you guys. So I will put that buddy homework in an email, and then right now we need to decide whether we're going to trust Margot to put us in buddies, and Margot's thought was we would have different buddy pairs each week. And so would you like Margot to do that? How many would, let's just do a show of hands. How many would like Margot to do that? And then the second show of hands will be, would you like to take care of it right now on this call? So how many would like Margot to do it? And how many would like to take care of it right now on this call? Well, I guess the other people didn't care then. So Margot, will you set up the buddy thing and email everyone who their buddy is? And the idea then would be for you guys to reach out by email or however you reach out to each other and set up a time where you would meet on Zoom or however you want to meet between now and next Monday. Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I can offer to make the rest of the roulette, or the, how did you call it? The rest of the carousel. 9 weeks.
Okay. We're good with that, right? Good with that.
In terms of arrangements, it might be easier if we have like a Facebook or a WhatsApp group. Might be faster than to coordinate these things than email.
That's good for me. I'm not involved in this, but because I don't use WhatsApp. But if somebody wants to set up a Facebook group, or if you want to do WhatsApp between yourselves, go ahead. So Margot, I'm gonna
do that.
Pardon me?
Can someone volunteer to do either? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Adriana's gonna do what? What are you gonna do, Adriana? The WhatsApp?
I offer myself to do the WhatsApp group.
WhatsApp.
If that's okay with everybody. And also because I don't like Facebook groups. So if everybody's okay with WhatsApp, I will do it.
Okay, yeah. But know that for me, you have to email me because I don't use WhatsApp.
Yeah, definitely. But
I've tried to deal with it, but I'm not.
And do you use Facebook group?
Yeah, but I don't care. I mean, maybe I don't have to be
I hear that.
I am asking for some communication if anything useful for me comes out of your debriefing thing.
Brilliant.
So
I can email you with that.
Yeah, I'll just ask for the email and trust you guys to deal with that, with my needs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Any other loose ends, comments, questions? All right, thanks for being able to stay a little later. I think this is a good idea to leave a little time for slopping over, because I told you I'm not very good managing time, and I'd rather just do it this way. Okay, bye for now.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.